about Humanities DC.
When I think about the humanities, what I think about are our history, our values, our ideas, and our culture.
There are things that touch us in our soul, in our spirit, that makes us feel like we're connected to something bigger than who we are.
It's also going back to remember those that have come before us who have framed these communities.
I don't really know how you can live without the humanities and the arts.
Discovering the tapestry of our nation's capital through its stories, its neighborhoods, and its citizens is the mission of Humanities DC. Through its many grants and programs, Humanities DC reaches more than 660,000 residents in each of the district's 8 wards.
This is an amazingly diverse place. It's diverse from the point of view of American history and populations, but it's also increasingly diverse with respect to international or trans-global populations, people coming from all over the world to live here.
A grant from Humanities DC enabled filmmaker Shaleigh Hainsworth to continue her Black Broadway on You project.
Humanities DC, they understood the importance of this movement of the digital humanities and preserving the history, the humanities, the cultures, and art in the digital space.
Humanities DC's Soul of the City received $40,000 from the Pulitzer Prize Board for innovative youth educational summer programs.
Well, quite frankly, the Soul of the City changed my life.
Humanities DC's Community Heritage Project helps newcomers better understand their neighborhood.
Gentrification, it's everywhere. How do they understand what's happening to them, to their communities? And the humanities are a way of doing that.
Humanities DC is a strategic partner to the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities.
They exist to actually manage programs in humanities that we don't have the capacity to manage. They have a very vibrant organization, so I see them as a partner.
Where happy hour meets the humanities. That's the think and drink definition of a humanitine. These happy hour conversations bring panels of academics, cultural curators, musicians, and many experts for lively conversation and debate.
It is an opportunity for young people to come out and learn through panel discussions about the city, about its neighborhoods, about its history, and most importantly, about its politics.
We have a bookstore, we have authors that come here and talk, we have poets, we have writers. All of these things are part of the humanities. It's what makes us human.
The common denominator in all of these programs is Humanities DC. We invite you to support our mission. Give the gift of humanities to your fellow Washingtonians for years to come.
I'd like to show you another quick video. I'd like to share another quick video. This part of today's topic concerns DC statehood. Senator Strauss has shown us a video in reference to that.
For see, the most important title you can have is not president or governor
DAR,
or even
to
senator.
me, means tradition, heredity,
Every citizen has an
long-standing friendship. People.
The most important title you can have is not president or governor or even senator.
That's right, Rosario. It's citizen, and every citizen has an obligation to make our democracy work.
But citizens who live in our nation's capital do not have voting representation in Congress. That's why I support statehood. for the District of Columbia.
If you believe all Americans deserve equal rights, join our campaign for DC statehood.
We all have a part to play. Go District of Columbia.
Everyone, again, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jay Stewart. I am the Program Director for Humanities DC. I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight to our final event in the year-long series commemorating the 225th anniversary of DC's founding. I'd like to start out by thanking our hosts, busboys and poets. In particular, I'd like to thank Alicia Bird, Alicia Bullock, Patrick Bonesteel, and AJ Head for their patience and help in putting this together. I'd also like to thank Steve Cole, our videographer in the back. I'd like to recognize some of our board members who are in attendance. I believe I saw Marjan Shalal there in the back, and Rosemary Reed. I also want to recognize, Ray Grant. Thank you, Ray. And also I'd like to thank our staff for helping me out quite a bit putting this together, starting with Stephanie Scott. Our office administrator. Unfortunately, Jasmine Collier couldn't be here tonight, but I think Louis Hicks is here. Is that accurate? Louis may not be in the room, but Louis is our grant manager, so you should meet with him afterwards. I'll have him raise his hand. I'd like to recognize our executive director, Joy Ford Austin, here by the door. And Calvin Kuhnstack, our publicist, who's sitting next to Joy. Okay, I'd also like to thank our honorary committee, the mayor, the DC Council, DC Public Library Director Richard Reyes Gavilan, DC Archivist Becky Katz, Historical Society Director John Swau, Cultural Tourism DC Director Steve Shulman, DC Preservation League Director Rebecca Miller, and also present tonight, DC Commission on Arts and Humanities Director Arthur Espinoza Jr. Finally, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Busboys and Poets, DC Brow, and A Creative DC. Humanities DC is an independent nonprofit affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, the federal agency in charge of supporting the humanities throughout the United States. Humanities DC is an essential part of the district's effort to provide quality humanities-related programs that preserve Washington's cultural legacy and promote civic engagement in every neighborhood in DC. This year marks the 225th anniversary of the founding of the District of Columbia. As part of the celebration of this event, starting in January and continuing monthly for the rest of the year, we've held panel discussions with scholars and contemporary commentators to discuss the highlights of a series of 20-year periods in the history of the district, and to link the events of the past to present-day issues and concerns of district residents. Humanities DC hope to illuminate the often overlooked local history of the nation's capital and to define characteristics of a unique contemporary culture of the district. Given the cultural and economic changes taking place in the city, we believe that reflecting on what our history has to teach us about the present is both timely and important. Today's topic is DC's immediate present and our predictions for its near future. The November 8th election came as a shock to many. The consequences for DC can only be dimly or grimly imagined. The important point to make at the outset is that DC has long sought for itself greater autonomy from congressional control. Over the past decade or so, the district has demonstrated an increased ability to operate on its own without oversight. Today, we will talk about our hopes and fears for the future, both for the District of Columbia and for its residents. Before I get started with our panel tonight, I would like to introduce a few people who helped make this possible. This is sort of a closing ceremony for the year-long commemoration of DC history. I'd like to start out with the chair of our board of directors, Mr. Robert Brennan.
How many of you have been to prior sessions of this program? Okay, pretty good. Thank you for coming then, and thank you for coming now. I'll try to be brief, but I do want to talk about some of the things we've done in the past, just to remind you. There are some themes that have carried all the way through these various 12 programs. One of those is the tension between our DC government and our absentee landlord in Capitol Hill. Second is our continuing struggle to promote racial harmony in the district. And finally, trying to negotiate the intersection of national and local interests. And I just want to use a quote from Frederick Douglass to kind of sum up our goals. He said, "The city belongs to all of us, and whether it is mean or majestic, whether it arrayed in glory or covered in shame, we cannot but share its character and its destiny." That's all of us. The issues and the personalities that we've discussed in prior sessions have made our history. And our history really defines, in good part, what's going on today. Let me highlight a couple of quick examples. In May, we focused on Boss Shepherd. He led the Department of Public Works from 1871 to 1873. He was the original whatever-it-takes guy for Washington, D.C. In the space of 3 years, he put flesh on what Pierre L'Enfant had as a dream. He oversaw the building of 100 miles of streets. He paved 70 miles of streets. He put in 3,000 gas lamps. He paved over a toxic open sewer that we call the City Canal. It's now Constitution Avenue. He kept Congress in the dark, and his favorite method for acquiring rights of way was to commission a couple of hundred men with construction equipment to arrive in the middle of the night, tear down everything in sight, and the next morning they would bring in the construction crews and start building roads and sewers. By the time he was finished in 1873, the city was bankrupt, and so was Shepherd. But the point was, the city was transformed, and our current developers would love to have that kind of freedom to do their work. In July, we discussed the women's suffrage movement. This is a happy intersection of local and national interests. The DC-based national organization run by Alice Paul began a march down Pennsylvania Avenue in 1913. And it ended with the U.S. cavalry being called in to get the ladies out of the road. Before long, there was a steady strumping of White House pickets, jailings, hunger strikes, forced feeding, psychiatric hospital detentions. President Wilson, who had inaugurated Mother's Day and thought that that was enough for the ladies, was forced to recognize that this was a serious issue. But it took those women until 1919 to get it passed. But the women of DC have been the real beneficiaries. Today, 2 of our last mayors have been women. 6 of our 13 current city council members are women. 19 of our 57 associate justices on this DC Superior Court are women. And our most recent police chief and superintendent of schools, also. So where would we be without them? In September, we talked about the DC as a laboratory of democracy, and focused the impact on our city of Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation and the court case of Bowling v. Sharp. And that case was directed at the DC public school system, which was very well regarded when it was set up in 1874, but by 1949, it was a shamble of inequality. 14th Amendment to the Constitution that guaranteed equal protection under the law didn't apply to DC. So a group of parents had to sue. Fortunately, that case finally came to judgment at the Supreme Court in 1954. The parents won, and at that point, that was the same day that Brown v. Education was adjudicated. So while the progress of equality in the public school system is still a work in process, we're making significant and steady progress. So we're all aware that the culture of DC has been under stress for decades. Steady flow of new residents, strong economic growth have put intense pressure on the longest living residents in the district. However, DC has always relied on the talents and energy of new arrivals, and who came from across the country and now from across the globe, and it's always going to be that way. So I would summarize kind of by saying our mission in putting this program together has been to use the humanities to help all of us understand the district's history so that we can value what has been, but accommodate and recognize what's coming at us. So with that, I just add all of my thanks to you all for coming, and for the staff, and particularly Marjan and Andy, who have made this wonderful facility available to us. And that's it. Thank you. I'm going to turn this over to Arthur for a few words.
Thank you, Bob. Good evening. My name is Arthur Espinoza. I'm the Executive Director of the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities. How many of you are familiar with the Commission? Good, I've got some work to go. Yeah, that's all right. It's a real pleasure to be with you this evening, and I'm very happy to offer my congratulations to Joy Ford Austin on her fine work with Humanities DC. I want to give her another round of applause. She does amazing work for Humanities DC. Thank you. I'm also honored to be a member of the 225th Anniversary Commemoration Honorary Committee. It's a mouthful, by the way, but it's also a mouthful to say that it recognizes the city's Quasca Bicentennial. Did I say that right? Quasca Bicentennial. That was a new word for me. I thought it went the other way around. I thought you said the centennial part, and then anyway, I figured it out. 225 years later, here we are, and I'm also celebrating an anniversary. I am 1 year old in the district, as of today. Apparently, I have a way to go, as it were. But also, in celebration of the 225th anniversary, the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, we undertook a special project. Inspired by Joy, I said, I'd like to have 225 new pieces of work. Well, it didn't quite work out like that. So what we did is we said, let's have a special call for artists, visual artists, and let's collect Washington-only artists in our art bank collection. So we inaugurated and some of you may know that we inaugurated the Washingtonia collection. That becomes part of, really, all of our property. The Washingtonia collection features works of fine art by DC-based artists, and subject matter of these artworks are exclusively about the District of Columbia. So if you're not familiar with that, I invite you to become more familiar with the newest collection, and also to become more familiar with the art bank collection that we have overall by visiting, and I know you're already going to get your pens out and write this down, but by visiting our website at dcarts.dc.gov and visiting our new e-museum platform. So some of you may know that a lot of the artwork that's placed in government buildings throughout the district, you see them in city offices as well, some of the dignitaries and some of the other directors of the agencies. This is all part of the collection that we have that's known as the Art Bank Collection. And it's really all of our collection. It's in the trust for the city, and it becomes something that becomes a way to recognize and honor the great work of the many visual artists that we have around us. So please visit the e-museum. I don't want to take any more time because I know these guys are really ready for their humanitini part. The teeny part is what they're actually looking forward to, right? And I imagine that everybody would have these little tiny glasses. I see they're actually really big glasses. So apparently I got to get my own martini humanitini. But thank you all. I'm happy to be here, and congratulations to Joy and to all of the staff. Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Jay. And I'm very pleased to be here. Have a good evening.
Good evening, everyone. I am so happy to see so many people here celebrate the district and its rich history and its future. My name is Rebecca Katz. I am the administrator of the Office of Public Records here in the district. I've been in this position for just over a year, so if you remember my predecessor, I'm here now. Sorry. And I've been, unlike Arthur, I've been working for the district for almost 10 years. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Office of Public Records, I want to give you a quick introduction. We have a three-part mission, which is laid out in the Public Records Management Act, which you can see here on my scarf. We facilitate effective and economical records management for the district government. We maintain the official archives of the District of Columbia. And we provide a source of reference and research information about the government of the district. So our records management functions are very, very important, but they're less interesting to people outside of the government. So the DC Archives is the part of our office that people know about, that people are excited about. And I want to give a shout out right now. I'm not seeing any members of the Friends of the DC Archives, but they have been wonderful for advocating on behalf of OPR. So thank you to the Friends group. So those of you who do know about OPR probably know about our most used collections. We have wills and birth certificates and death certificates. We have the marriage record for Richard and Mildred Loving. You may not know that they got married in DC, which is how they then broke the law in Virginia that started that whole case. We also have deeds to property and building permits, which are two collections that people use frequently. But here's something that you may not know that we have. We have nearly minute-by-minute records of reports that were made to the Mayor's Command Center between 1968 and 1978. So for example, you may not know, like I didn't know because I wasn't here, there was a train derailment on Christmas Eve in 1976. And so we have records from the Command Center that talk about all of the effects of that. Another event that happened that's in that collection, which is a little bit more topical and timely, is the inauguration of 1973. There were a lot of protests, and there were 40 people who were arrested on January 20th, 1973. One of those arrests was for carrying a bayonet. So if you are planning on protesting this January 20th, leave your bayonet at home. Speaking of the president who was being inaugurated in 1973, President Nixon, in 1969, Apollo 11 brought back to Earth fragments of moon rocks, which President Nixon then distributed to foreign heads of state and to the states in the United States. The rocks were mounted with a miniature state flag, which had also been to the moon on that mission. And this is why I'm bringing this up, besides the fact that we have the moon rocks. It's very cool. Most people don't know that we have them. The plaque on the mounting of the moon rocks reads, "This flag of your state was carried to the moon and back by Apollo 11, and this fragment of the moon's surface was brought to Earth by the crew of that first manned lunar landing." So there you have it. President Nixon called us a state. May we merit that all future presidents acknowledge us as such.
Microphone, please.
Beginning to think I've drunk too much of this Okay, so I'm delighted to see such a wonderful group, and I want to move quickly to the main program. But I wanted to let you know this is a celebration. This is a celebration of our city, of its 225 years. It's also a celebration of the opportunities, the privilege that we have had over the last 12 months to think about this wonderful city, the city that we love so much, to think about our lives here, and to consider the issues over the years that have brought us together and haven't quite got us to statehood yet. I wanted to also assure you that you will all receive your own Humanitini glasses. So, privilege to have Arthur here and Rebecca as members of the honorary committee. And it's a privilege to have all of you. The Humanities format is that our speakers do initial presentations, and then you get a chance to have as full a discussion as you want about the issues of the day. And over the 225 years, we have reached tonight the issues of the day. So thank you guys for coming. It's a nice full audience, and I appreciate all of you for being here. I hope you'll participate as fully as possible. Thank you.
Okay, very quickly, I'd like to introduce our panel for tonight. I also would like to recognize a couple of board members who've come in the meantime. Tyler, Patricia, could you stand up? Board fellow. Anne Marie, Long, could you stand up? Got a couple more folks. So thank you all again for coming. I just wanted to introduce our panelists. I'm just going to tell you their names and point, and I'll let them introduce themselves individually. But you should also have a small bio in your program. Okay, so starting on my left, your also left. I'm sorry. Belle, can you raise your hand? Belle Julian Clement, professor at GW. Okay, I'm going alphabetically, so I'm a little bit out of order from the panel as they're sitting. Derek Musgrove, professor at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Sabia Prince, here on our left, also an anthropologist and author of the book about DC. Paul Strauss, our senator. Dr. Ward, you've already met. Sheree Ward is our moderator. She seems to have a hometown advantage. Her students are here from UDC Community College. Very good. And finally, Charles Wilson, president of the Ward 8 Democrats, and also the Liberty Affairs Committee. Can I turn this over to you?
Good evening, everyone. How are you? Now, you know, this is December. This is the last Humanities. This is a party with a purpose. So how are you this evening? Make some noise! Now, that's what I'm talking about. Jay has already introduced our speakers. And so from Ms. Sabia Prince, we're going to go around in order. Each speaker will speak for no more than 5 minutes. And then we will open up the discussion to you, our audience. This is an interactive session. Drink up, because this is a party. So let's make some noise for our first speaker, Ms. Sabia Prince.
Hello, good evening. Thank you guys for joining us. And we only have 5 minutes, but I do want to give a special thank you to the organizers for these Humanities, because I've attended a number of them. I think they've been phenomenal. They've been a great opportunity for us to learn about the history and culture of our city and give us an opportunity to dialogue and to network. So I look forward to seeing what you guys are going to do next year. Thank you so much. So we have been tasked with discussing where the city is going as it relates to our ongoing quest for political autonomy in Washington, DC. So it's also the case that the city has been experiencing very significant economic shifts, very significant demographic shifts, and suffice to say, there's a lot going on, and I think this is a great opportunity for us to connect some dots. So welcome again. I am going to address these questions and concerns from the perspective of, I'm an urban anthropologist, so more so than being a politician or an urban planner or a community development worker, I've been kind of for the last 20 years, sitting around people's kitchen tables, talking to them at their workplaces, holding focus groups, and doing participant observation with various grassroots organizations, looking at the legacies of classism and racial inequality over the last many decades. So that's just full disclosure so you guys know kind of where I'm coming from. And a part of doing good social science is really putting your findings against some sort of a backdrop, right? Because nothing occurs within a vacuum. So my contribution to this discussion this evening is very, very contextual. And so I'm going to begin I edited a book along with Derek Hire, a sociologist at American University, some of you may know, entitled Capital Dilemma. It came out last December. And one of the things that we kind of note in our book, along with our contributors, Belle next to me and Derek, they're both contributors to our book, we noticed that uneven development has reached epic proportions in Washington, DC. And there are numerous indicators of that. So I'm going to share a bit about 3 studies that have come out more or less recently to illustrate where our city is going in terms of economic trends. The first one is a study that was done in September by the DC Fiscal Policy Institute. They issued a report noting that the African American residents increasingly live east of the river here in our city, where the poverty rate is 3 times larger than the rest of DC. And the report said, and I'm going to quote from it, "This reflects 2 important trends: continued economic depression on the east side of the river, despite the economic recovery of the city as a whole, and a decline in the black population on the west side." Here's a startling number, or some startling statistics. East of the Anacostia River is now 92% African American. West of the Anacostia River is now 33% African American. Okay, and that's those are numbers that are down from 42% in 2007. Bear that in mind. Second study, The Color of Wealth in the Nation's Capital. That's a report that was put together by Duke University, the New School, the Urban Institute, and the Insight Center for Community Economic Development. Came out in October. And basically what this report finds is that white households in DC now have a net worth of 81 times greater than the black household. Okay, this particular disparity is not rooted in education, as 80% of the white residents with a high school diploma or less are homeowners, compared to 45% of African Americans. The study also found that there is racial parity in the number of businesses owned, but white businesses are valued higher. Okay. Third, study relates to the issue of homelessness. HUD did a study noting that the number of homeless families in our city is now up 30% from last year. Actually, the number is about 34%. And there are numerous explanations for this. It really depends on who you talk to. If you talk to government officials, they will tell you that the spike is caused by better monitoring and the fact that more households are now in shelters, which makes it easy for us to, account for them. Okay. And homeless advocates are saying the rise is linked to failures in our governmental system with foster children and with the DC public schools. The Bowser administration blames on affordability of housing, working class living, and people being pushed out to the streets. All of those are probably factors, right? I mean, I think they're all equally implicated here. But regarding the subject at hand, and I'm going to conclude here, all these indicators force us to ask, how are these factors going to shape the fight for statehood in DC? How are these factors going to determine who is impacted by statehood if we are to realize those goals? That's what we overwhelmingly voted for on November 8th. And so that's my contribution, is to kind of think about who's going to benefit, who's going to be here, how are we going to leverage power, how are we going to form sustainable movements to work together across these growing divisions to fight for statehood in Washington.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Sabia Prince. Give her a round of applause, everyone. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Our next speaker will be Ms. Belle Julian Clement.
Good evening, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. My understanding of what we're doing tonight is that we're having a conversation about where we are going to be putting our attentions and our energies as a city over the next little while. It's the kind of conversation that without hope is happening all over the city all the time. As Jay introduced at the startup, we've got 2 major considerations that are kind of hanging over us right now. And one is this wonderful uptick recently over the last few years in efforts to move the district legislatively towards self-rule. And the other, of course, is the results of the 2016 election. So taking those in order, starting with self-rule, are we right? Should the district have self-rule? Well, of course we're right. A couple of things I pulled out of some recent Washington Post articles. The point about self-rule is that there are 100 good arguments about why we ought to have it. I think most of us here are familiar with most of those. Fun facts, we have more population than Vermont or Wyoming. They have senators. Our economic activity per capita is greater than 16 of our other states in the United States. We pay more federal tax than 22 other jurisdictions. The federal contribution to the district is all Washington Post data. Federal contribution to the district is 40% of our overall cost. That means we get less than 30 other jurisdictions. This means the district is a donor jurisdiction. We pay more than we get back. We are paying these folks. Second point, the election of Mr. Trump. And I guess where I want to go with that is to suggest that we don't waste any time shooting the messenger. The messenger here is not the important point. What we need to look at is the message. There are a number of different messages involved. Some of them are contradictory. One of them that I think is important to all of us here is the elections viewed as an attack on the kind of urban culture that we really all want to be participating in. The second message is the message of inequality, and that's one that I particularly want to focus on, and I think that's where there is some opportunity for action. Which brings me to the point here. Our issue tonight is, okay, where are the opportunities with these two major conditions in mind, statehood and Trump? Where are the opportunities, where are the challenges? What's my answer? Well, my starting position, and with due respect to our senator who's present, is that statehood is a non-starter. And I maybe distinguish home rule, but statehood, in my view, is a non-starter. And I don't feel too bad about that because I'm not sure it's our biggest opportunity or the thing that we should be keeping our eyes on. Okay, so what are my sources of history for that? My assertion is that statehood or the rule of the district is about power. It's not about argument. We have all the good arguments. They have most of the ammunition. What's my example in history for that? Let's look at 1973. What happened there when we did achieve an important expansion of self-rule? Two things happened. Institutional change and personnel change. Institutional change. One, civil rights movement. Home rule was viewed by LBJ as his capstone contribution to the civil rights movement. Even Richard Nixon, who actually signed the Home Rule Act, found that important. But there's another institutional change that I think was overlooked and was equally, if not more important. That was administrative streamlining in the federal government at that time. This got changed because senators felt that probably they should no longer be spending their time setting pool hours for Wilson High School. Second change, personnel. John McMillan, the chairman of the District House Committee, got helped into retirement by the efforts of Reverend Fauntleroy and others down in South Carolina. One change. Second change, William Kress, who was the head of the Board of Trade and a staunch opponent, not without some good arguments, of home rule, retired. The board immediately reversed its position. Okay, so to wind up, if home rule, if statehood is not our biggest opportunity, where do we go? I say history, the movement of time, is not evolutionary. It's cyclical. In other words, we're not better prepared or less well prepared. We're not better or less worthy of statehood than previous generations here. The key is to look for the main opportunities. What's the importance of statehood? Who exactly is helped by statehood? Is this a movement that is going to draw thousands of working class residents and workers of DC to the steps of the Capitol? When it does that, we have something. Until then, maybe not so much. My suggestion, finally, let's explore the hybrid status of the district. I suggest that the district's federal and local status are inextricably interwoven, and that we would be well served by exploring the potentials of that, number one. Number two, we are a young city, and time is on our side. Tenochtitlan was founded in 1325. We've been here for 225 years. As as our progress is going, we will in time overwhelm the federal presence. It'll feel a lot more like Paris here than it does now. And what our goal then is to choose the opportunities that are appropriate for our time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bell Julian Clement. And our next speaker, Mr. Derek Musgrove. Give him a round of applause. Oh, you can make more noise than that. It's Christmas. Yes.
Well, I think there's a reason that Bell is one of my favorite historians in the district, because she just set me up perfectly for what I want to discuss. You know, Bell's point that we should be elastic in our quest for self-determination, I think is really well taken by a historian. And so what I'm going to do in the time that I have is talk about the 3 different ways that residents of the district have attempted to gain self-determination in the Congress of the United States, a vote in Congress, not just in committee, but on the floor. And talk about which ones have been successful and which ones have dominated the city at different points in the city's history. So like I said, there's 3 ways that people have attempted to gain self-determination in the city. The first one, and quite frankly the most successful one, was retrocession. In the 1840s, the residents of Arlington, Virginia, didn't want to be in the city. It was for a very unsavory reason. It was because they wanted to protect the slave trade. You have to remember that the internal slave trade at the time was one of the biggest industries in the United States, and so it's like Facebook was sitting right across the river. These were very rich people. And they were able to get the Virginia legislature into Congress to vote them out of DC, back into Virginia, and they got a vote in Congress. And that's the only time someone who has been a resident of DC has had their voting rights in Congress restored ever in the city's history. Now, the next major push to gain a vote in Congress came in the mid-1970s. And that's when Walter Fauntroy and the members of Self-Determination for DC, which was a major lobbying organization in the city for a vote in Congress, attempted to pass the DC Voting Rights Amendment. And that was an amendment to the Constitution that did not nullify the Home Rule Act. We would still have the Home Rule Act, we'd still have Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution that said Congress would have ultimate oversight authority of the city. What it did do, though, was put representatives of the city in Congress. And so we would at least have people in the room when those people were talking about what they were going to do with the city, right? So we get 1 member of the House, 2 members of the Senate under that amendment to the Constitution. It passes Congress, and is sent, in 1978 it passes Congress, largely because of a really robust lobbying campaign in the states. Walter Fauntroy and other people in the city are mobilizing voters in other states around the country, pressuring their members of Congress to vote for this legislation, and it passes. And it then goes to the states and is defeated by a very robust conservative movement that's sort of getting ginned up by the ERA. They wanted to destroy the ERA, and one of their arguments was, if we get members of DC in the House and the Senate, they're going to vote for the ERA, so don't vote for the DC Voting Rights Amendment. And it's killed. As soon as that is being killed, statehood forces come to dominate the movement for a vote in Congress in DC. In 1980, an amendment is put on the ballot that says, look, we're going to go ahead and pass the Constitution, send it to Congress and ask for a state, and hopefully Congress will just vote it up. And ever since 1980, we have focused on statehood as our strategy for gaining self-determination for the district. And there have been 3 moments where there have been serious efforts to try and put statehood before Congress for a vote, and it's failed every single time. 1987, when Walter Fauntroy cleans up the statehood constitutions, tries to get it to the floor of Congress for a vote, never even gets out of committee. 1993, there's actually a vote on the floor. It fails in the House and only gets about 150 votes. And then most recently, this push that was initiated by the mayor, and that's dead before it even goes to Congress because Hillary Clinton lost and Democrats lost in the House, didn't win back the House or the Senate. So at this moment, we are looking at trying to figure out what to do going forward. We have 3 options, and I think that we should be elastic in trying to figure out if statehood is the best option at this moment. I'll take whichever one is possible, but I do think we have to have a serious conversation about strategy going forward.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Musgrove. Come on, y'all can do better than that. Let's not talk about this. The last documentary, so we certainly can't have the Christmas edition be a lull party. So make some noise. Thank you again, Mr. Musgrove. Come on, come on. Yeah. Okay, our next speaker, Senator Paul Schuck.
Thank you very much. It's exciting to be here. When I was first invited in October, I began to write some remarks. President-elect Clinton, Majority Leader Schumer, Speaker Pelosi, I'm so pleased that we have an exciting, all right, so, that didn't happen. I'm going to start actually by reading words that were written by somebody else. Mr. Speaker, the fact that more than 500,000 Americans living in the District of Columbia are denied a single voting representative in Congress is clearly a historic wrong. The simple overreaching principle that the American founding was that laws should be based upon the consent of the government. The first generation of Americans threw tea in Boston Harbor because they were denied a voting representative in the national legislature in England. Given their commitment to representative democracy, it is inconceivable to me that our founders would have been willing to accept the denial of representation to so great a throng of Americans in perpetuity. And for that reason, this member of Congress stood in support of the DC Voting Rights Bill. Quick show of hands, right? Give my hand. Which member of Congress do you think you all just applauded? Take a guess. I'll give you a hint. Because they're about to swear him in on January 20th as the new Vice President of the United States. Those words were spoken by Mike Pence and taken from a congressional record. It's interesting that as we talk about, well, somebody began by quoting Richard Nixon, so I can certainly, this has been an interesting year for our movement, to say the least. On the one hand, we are buoyed by an 86% margin of victory by people who voted yes on state as opposed to who voted no. The highest number ever. We have energized this movement, we have reformed the Constitution, we have engaged more citizens in the struggle, and recommitted ourselves to the strategy that we began, known as the Tennessee Plan. For those of you that don't know what the Tennessee Plan is, I'm with a lot of historians here, so I'm going to do a little bit of history, but in 1795, in the 4th Congress of the United States, people of Tennessee were denied statehood. They tried all kinds of ways to appease what was then the East Coast establishment elites. They originally tried to join the Union by naming themselves after Ben Franklin. And after being denied admission as the state of Franklin, they finally gave up, declared themselves to be a state. Their territorial legislature elected 2 United States senators who got on a horse, rode all the way up to the Capitol, knocked on the door, were met by the Senate doorkeeper, a position that we still have today, now going into the 115th Congress, and they introduced themselves as the newly elected senators from the state of Tennessee. The doorkeeper, not really knowing what to do, set out 2 chairs on the floor of the United States Senate in the 4th Congress, where they sat until the admission of Tennessee was ultimately resolved. Those were the first 2 shadow senators in U.S. history, the term shadow coming from the British parliamentary system, meaning the opposition of government in waiting. And in fact, that strategy was used by territories several times, particularly in the run-up to the Civil War. Slave states were aggressive in blocking the admission of new free states, so free states like California, Michigan. Minnesota had to elect shadow senators as part of their strategy to gain statehood. In the 20th century, the territory of Alaska elected a shadow congressional delegation as part of its effort to gain statehood. And we in the District of Columbia have committed and now recommitted ourselves to this strategy. Clearly, we have had some setbacks, but it was in reaction to a missed opportunity that we had in 2008, where all of a sudden we had a president that supported statehood, we had a majority of the Senate that supported statehood, we had a majority in the House of Representatives that supported statehood, and we lacked a strategy to be ready for that opportunity. Our strategy consisted of signs and leafleting people as the inauguration came, and never again were we going to be caught so unprepared and so unaware. Obviously, we had hoped for a different result in the national election. I look forward to discussing and unpacking and beginning the process, what for a lot of us is various stages of grief. Some of us are still in denial, some are bargaining, some are in anger. But this is not the result that we wanted. But I sit here with you today in the Langston Hughes room of Busboys and Poets. I see Andy Shalala joining us. And on the wall, first of all, let me recognize that today is a special anniversary. It was 61 years ago today that Rosa Parks stood up for all of us, literally by sitting down. And so we can talk about setbacks, but when we talk about setbacks in a room where you have the portraits of Gandhi, of Rosa Parks, of King, of so many historic figures who have all had difficult days in those movements, this is a time to be inspired. So yes, as Langston Hughes once wrote, it's time to talk about what happens to the dream deferred, but this is not a dream that we're going to let die. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Paul Strauss. Come on! Yes. And before we go to our last speaker, Mr. Charles Wilson, just understand, after he speaks, the floor will be open to you, our audience. That's part of this interactive discussion, so make sure you have your questions ready. We will have a mic going around the audience to address your questions. Are you having a good time? That doesn't sound like a good time to me. Make some noise. Are you having a good time? This is the DC Commission's Humanitini. Our final speaker, Mr. Charles Wilson.
Good evening, everyone. Hello, everybody. My name is Charles Wilson. First, I want to say happy post-Thanksgiving. And is it too early to say happy holidays? No. I can say, okay, well, happy holidays. Thank you for the invitation. I see Andy back there. Hopefully, in a year and a half, we will be having similar sessions in my neighborhood in Anacostia. Another year and a half. Less than a year? All right. Year from now. So I'm glad I'm going last because I'm not a historian. I'm not a professor. I'm not the senator. So I don't have all the facts and figures and history of statehood and voting rights. I'm really a neighborhood guy. I've been living in Anacostia now for 10 years. Very busy guy, ANC commissioner, president of the Warrior Democrats, started my own neighborhood association and a couple other organizations. And so I know how to pack a room. I know how to create an agenda that will get my neighbors excited. I'll tell you what those things are. Economic development, conversations about the shooting last night, trash on the street, and poverty. If I want to have an empty room, unfortunately, one of those topics is DC voting rights. And you know, I remember years ago when I think it was Mayor Gray and it was like 13 other folks got arrested on the Capitol, and we had a discussion on civil disobedience right there on Good Hope Road. And the only people we did mass advertising, and the only people that showed up were the folks who got arrested. The people in the community did not come. And they asked why, and I said, I think there's a disconnect between the passion that we all have for the subject, even though we have different opinions, and the regular everyday resident, at least in Ward 8 from my perspective. And so I think until that changes, until those social issues change, where people in my neighborhood feel like they don't feel comfortable knowing how they're going to put food on the table the next day, knowing that they live in a safe, clean neighborhood where they can come to a busboys and posts down the street. Until that changes in Ward 8, I think this conversation is always going to be a struggle in my community, and I hope we talk more about that. Thank you.
That concludes our last speaker. I have a little story from the back. Let's hear it from the front too. Make some noise. Yes, that's how a humanitarian should sound. So now we're going to open up the question and answer to our audience. I'm going to give the microphone to Jay. If you have a question or comment, please raise your hand and he will come to you. I don't see any hands. There you go. We're going to start in the back with the lady. Raise your hand, yes.
I don't think I need a microphone. I voted for DC statehood. Okay, all right, here we go. So anyway, I voted for DC statehood. I've lived here and operated my business for 30 years successfully this next year. But I have been asked by many people in other states why we want statehood, because then we have to compete with all the rest of the states for federal funding. And are we prepared to do that?
Who's going to address that question?
Let me start right now. Guess what? We compete with all of the states right now for federal funding, and we lose that fight. And when we compete for federal funding, it's not just us in the District of Columbia. Somebody accurately quoted statistics to talk about us as a donor jurisdiction. Let's just talk about the federal government stewardship of the purely federal areas. The National Mall is one of the most visited and popular of all national parks in the United States. And yet, more money is spent maintaining Yosemite National Park, located in one of the least populous states, than the National Mall that hosts the inaugurations of our president, so many visitors, so many marches, so many protests. So within our own national park system, our national parks can't compete fairly. One of the interesting things that I was able to do is help fight for federal funding, and it's often hard. Many of us don't think about the District of Columbia when it comes to something called the Farm Bill, for example. But when they wrote the Farm Bill, the District of Columbia was left off. It turns out the University of the District of Columbia, our state university, actually has a farm. And because of that, it was one of the only state universities that had an agricultural program that wasn't getting funded. And it took us having to go to Ben Nelson on his way out of Congress, behind the scenes, to get Senator Nelson to put DC into the Farm Bill so that UDC can get its fair share of funding. We compete all the time. We lose that competition because it's not a fair fight. Statehood would make that a fair fight.
Next question.
Good evening. I think one of the things that could be useful would be for the Humanities Council to give us the links to the two videos that we had earlier, because I think part of the issue is to educate about what the issues are in the city, and I think that would be very useful. But to my question, or really a strategy, almost every jurisdiction in the United States at one time or another has used the salary tax as a way to shore up the budgets. So for instance, if I live in Delaware and work in Philadelphia, there's a salary tax that I pay to Philadelphia. And our good neighbors, that's a loose term, our good neighbors have refused for us to have a salary tax. What I'd like to suggest is that one of the things that we do is to send a bill to Virginia and Maryland by computing the salary tax of residents from Maryland and residents from Virginia that work in the District of Columbia, and use that as a visible and demonstrable issue, because that's money that can we can use for the things that we need in the city.
Thank you, sir, for your comment. We have another question up here up front, sir. Raise your hand, please.
Isn't somebody going to address this?
1 second. We have Mr. Musgrove is going to address that comment.
So people have floated the idea in the past. Actual activists within the statehood movement have floated that idea in the past. And they've looked at it in two ways. I mean, there was a group called DC Rabble, which sort of announced itself but never really came to be, where they said, look, we're going to block commuters on their way into the city. And they never did it. And then there was DC Vote and Stand Up for Democracy in DC. And it was either in 2000, I think it was in 2002 or so, held a bonfire of the, what are the tax forms called? 1040s? Bonfire of the 1040s outside the Capitol building and at the main post office. And they really didn't have the stomach for having people break the law, right? Because they were basically saying, you know, put a little protest note in your tax filing form when you send it into the IRS. They were not willing to say, don't pay your taxes. I think the major problem with sending a tax bill to Maryland and Virginia is that some of our frenemies in the struggle for DC self-determination are in those states. In fact, some of our biggest frenemies, which people like Steny Hoyer, people like Tom Davis, you know, they support DC self-determination in principle, but if we even raise the idea of the commuter tax, they shut us down. And so the question...
And they're not friends.
That's why I call them frenemies. But I think that the question is, you know, sort of, do we have a political apparatus in the city that has the stomach for that type of battle, which would be a really ugly battle, quite frankly? And how would we be able to protect ourselves, considering that we are prostrate before Congress? Now, I'm not saying that it's not a bad idea. I'm saying that we have to be willing to deal with the repercussions of that idea, which will be bad.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll come to the question here in the front, sir.
I'm thinking of the Northern Mariana Islands, American Samoa, Guam, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, and the District of Columbia. Can't hear you. Sorry.
Can you repeat your question? I can't hear you.
I am.
Speak directly.
I'm thinking about the Northern Mariana Islands, American Samoa, Guam, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and the District of Columbia. Only one of those jurisdictions are stupid enough to pay federal taxes. They all pay taxes. But in some of those places, they pay taxes to themselves, to the federal government. I'm wondering why statehood is the only solution to ending taxation to that representation.
So, what an interesting list. Let's talk about it for a minute. The Marianas Islands, Guam, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, the District of Columbia. What do they all have in common? Well, we talked about the tax structure. We'll put that aside for a second. But demographically, they are all parts of the United States where the population happens to be majority non-white. And they are all parts of the United States that don't have voting representation in Congress. Now, I'm going to guess, without taking a survey, that nobody here thinks that that's just a coincidence. Anybody? No? Okay. So, it's interesting to note that while we were voting on our statehood constitution, that in the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, the residents there elected a pro-statehood governor who was talking about replicating our efforts with the Tennessee plan and moving forward towards statehood. I have a lot of allies in the Puerto Rican statehood movement. I have a lot of allies in Puerto Rican politics that don't support statehood. It very much touches on issues of language and national identity and gets more complicated. One of the things they always point out to me is they hate it when we say we're the only ones that pay federal taxes, and they point out a litany of federal taxes that they in fact pay. We are, of course, unique in that we pay federal income taxes, whereas they do not. But they also have greater degrees of self-determination. We are, in fact, under the control of Congress. We need to find a way to engage more with our fellow colonists and bring about some degree of unity. Statehood has always been a movement in the District of Columbia that originates on the left wing of the political spectrum. In, for example, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico happens to be a movement that originates on the right wing of the political spectrum. It's not uncommon to have a resident commissioner, which is their version of a non-voting delegate, who's a member of the Republican Party and the Statehood Party. And it has often been talked about that states joining the union have come in pairs. That beginning with the Kansas-Nebraska compromise, most recently Alaska and Hawaii, that you rarely get a state admitted solely. Normally, there's always some balance. First it was slave versus free, then it was partisan balance. So there's a lot going on in those territories. The Marianas Island actually used to have a shadow representative and finally got a non-voting delegate. Partnering with some of those home rule struggles and statehood struggles is, I think, something we need to invest the next couple of years in, as we're not going to be making the kind of progress in Congress that we want.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions? I see a lady right here in the back. Jay, can you get to her? Ma'am, would you please stand up? And then the lady in the back there will be next.
Hi, I'm a lifelong resident of this Columbia, native Washingtonian. A lot of my friends in Maryland and Virginia have said to me, you people in DC get a lot of perks because, for instance, we have a lot of seniors. We take advantage of the home care facilities and aids that they can get so many hours per week. And they say in DC and in Maryland and Virginia, they have to pay. So I'm wondering, will this be affected by statehood? I mean, I'm for statehood, but I would hate to lose those type of perks that we have. And that people in Virginia, Maryland say we take it, they have to pay for that we don't. Especially for our homebound, our seniors, and people who rely on those services. House, home aid. So when we lose that, I mean, statehood, I've never been really understand that.
So please correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but no, those services are city services, whether it's pre-K 3 and 4 or free pools for residents or aid to seniors. I mean, these are all things that are paid for with local tax dollars and are run by the city government. These aren't federal handouts. As Belle pointed out, for the taxes that we raise, we pay more to the federal government than we take in. This is our money, right? If folks in Maryland want those things, they can raise the money for them and pay for them, right? And so, just because they're upset that their government doesn't give them to them, shouldn't have them, saying, look, we don't want you guys to have self-determination because our government's not as good as yours.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have a lady over here with her hand up.
This woman has stand up.
Let's start with this lady, and then the young lady here, and then the lady here. Thank you.
Okay, I want to address this to Belle's comments. That we are in a hybrid state, and to ask what are some of the actions that we can take individually or as groups to make this work for us?
Okay, I'm going to ask each panelist in 1 minute to address her comments. Start with Sophia. Could you repeat the question, please, ma'am?
Yeah. Belle commented.
You need to speak directly into the microphone.
Okay,
Yeah.
Belle commented that we are in reality now in a hybrid situation with some of the elements of statehood and some not. What can we do as individuals and groups to make this actual situation work for us?
Well, I guess one of the things, the concerns that I have would be building a grassroots movement. So whatever steps need to be taken to bridge some of the gaps that exist between populations, which for me, one of my major concerns is dealing with social justice for vulnerable populations. So that's a starting point for me. I think that if people don't have adequate housing, which affordable housing is a crisis in Washington, DC now. So those are some of the kind of foundational issues that I'd like to see addressed in order to empower people so they can then at least have some staying power to begin to organize with others. So I think the grassroots piece is going to be central.
Belle?
Well, let me second that. My point here is that we're not going to achieve statehood anytime soon, and that therefore, and that maybe statehood is something of a diversion. I certainly don't fault any of us for pursuing home rule and statehood initiatives, but I don't think that's what's most important. I don't think that's where our key opportunities are now. And I would second what Sevilla says, that we need to turn to internal organizing. I think for the most part, the things that we want our city to be can be achieved without the jokers on the hill involved. They're wrong. Ultimately, they'll change, but right now, we need to be focusing locally. So we need to do this kind of organizing. I would, the suggestion about a commuter tax is a wonderful strategic suggestion, and in the proper hands, it can be used beautifully. But there's an alternative, which Derek pointed to, which is maybe we need to figure out how we can strengthen our alliances in the metropolitan area. Because after all, everybody knows these lines are artificial. We are a metropolitan center. How do we strengthen that, and how do we gradually move toward where we want to be in terms of self-government? The bottom line problem here is this is another one of those unfortunate policy situations that is going to take time, and it's going to require our patience. We will get there, but in the meantime, let's have other irons in the fire.
Okay, Mr. Musgrove, quickly, please.
Give you 3 things fast. Join an organization. DC Vote. Neighbors United for DC Statehood. Stand up for the DC Coalition. All of these groups need people desperately, and they need new voices and new energy, and so please join. Second is, call your council members and ask them to push the issue. One of the fascinating things about the marijuana ballot initiative was that it got wrapped up in statehood. Well, could we do that around schools? Half of our school children are in a system that is not controlled by local elected officials. Should we say something about that? I think we should. Ask your council members to do that. And the third thing, and this is what I find fascinating, about 8 years ago, a couple of DC residents just got really pissed off, walked downtown, went into the gallery of the House and the Senate, and when they were voting on DC legislation, just stood up and said, DC votes no, and got arrested. And you can do that too if you don't want to join an organization.
Okay, Paul, Senator Strauss, would you comment?
It's not an answer that lends itself well to a single minute. But we need to realize that we are back on defense, which means that we have to be prepared not necessarily to get the goals of advancing statehood and self-determination, but fighting for the attacks. We can expect that we're going to be facing changes on gun laws. We know that when we can divorce this movement from economic, political agendas of one ideology or another, we can bring inclusion and move forward. Mike Pence did not rise up in support because he was looking forward to how we vote when we got voting mechanisms. We appeal to him on simple principles, and we need to do that. We have to recognize that the capital of the United States of America does have a significant value to all of the people of the United States. And one of the things statehood does is it bifurcates and protects the national capital, leaving it for the Americans while separating local DC from that. So a two-state solution is really what statehood is about.
Mr. Wilson.
So I think Senator Strauss mentioned in his initial comments that this past November, the vote was what, 86% voted in favor of statehood, and the other 17% voted no. I think we had to find out why that other 17 voted no. In my experience, I noticed that in this past conversation, when there were these tours around the city to talk about this referendum, there was a small group of residents around the city who were very upset about what was being proposed. And I think there needs to be a shared vision and a shared strategy starting now that we kind of have to reset and kind of start over to kind of get everybody back on the same page. Additionally, like I said in my initial comments, one of the things we have, I'm trying to figure out how to say this right. We have to we have to encourage the city's politicians to push some of this economic development opportunities east of the river. Until that happens, People east of the river are not going to get excited about DC voting rights. People are worried about how are they going to keep their lights on the next day. How are they going to put clothes on their kids' back so they can go to school? Those are the top issues that we're facing in our own community. Until that happens, there's always going to be a struggle.
Okay, we have a University of the District of Columbia student right here. Please stand. While she's standing, we have students from the University of the District of Columbia. I'm proud to say they're my students. Please stand at this time. Make some noise. That's a wonderful thing about humanity. It touches all of the residents and the people involved in the discussion.
As a resident of Ward 7, I would like to know, by having a statehood, will it stop DC residents from being in-state tuition schools if you, from getting in-state tuition if you go to out-of-state schools?
Could you say that question again loudly, please?
By having statehood, will it stop DC residents from getting in-state tuition if you go to out-of-state schools?
Okay, Senator Strauss, great question.
Great question. You're talking about the DC TAG program, and the answer is that one of the benefits, probably one of the few perceived perks that we get if you live in DC. Here's how TAG works. Here's how it's funded. Here's why it's never going away, regardless of whether it's state. The Tuition Assistance Grant Program is a subsidy from the federal government to the 50 state university systems of every other state. So what happens, and full disclosure, I'm the parent of a child who's getting federal TAG money that is being paid to a university system of another state right now. Every time members of Congress try to cut TAG and wonder why we have this benefit, the chancellors of those 50 other state systems call their senators and say, hey, I don't know if you realize this, but this is money that the federal government gives our state system. Yes, DC residents are the beneficiaries of it, but it's to compensate us, not for not having a great state university, because we do, but because we don't have the full resources of the state university system. So, TAG will continue, just as the subsidies that the colonists in Alaska used to get and continue to get, continue for their energy reserves. Nobody ever got less money out of the federal government the day they got 2 voting senators. You always get more, and that would continue.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question over here. Please stand up. Yes, ma'am.
I'll try to stand up. So my question adds on to that, actually, the question of the perks that DC supposedly gets from the federal government. And I think, while I think in the long run, the argument for statehood or voting rights will be more one of enfranchisement and not disenfranchising, half a million people, I think the problem we're countering is that even here in the room, people think that the federal government somehow carries DC financially, and that is not true except for our prisons and the courts. And otherwise, the DC provides its city services, it gets Medicaid through the same way every other state does. And so I'd like to know how you plan to counter that idea that DC somehow is like getting special privileges and special perks from having the federal government here, when we actually provide a lot of services to them too, like fire, emergency management, and police response. So what's the strategy for that?
Okay, we're going to have Mr. Musgrove and Ms. Clement respond to that, please.
I think your question is excellent, and I think it actually addresses the point that Charles raised earlier, which is how do you make self-determination important to people in their everyday lives here in DC? It's simple. Disproportionately for poor people, right, who are disproportionately in our prisons. If you get arrested, you might get sent to Kansas. You might get sent to Alabama, right? We don't have a prison system here, right? Like if you leave the jail and you get convicted and go to prison, you can go anywhere and your family is going to have a hell of a time trying to visit you, right? We don't have control over our schools. We can't write DCPS because half of our students aren't in DCPS, right? I mean, those types of things hit people in their pocketbook, they affect their everyday lives, and those are not benefits for us, right?
Ms. Clement, you want to respond?
Actually, I'm not, Derek gave the right and useful answer. The other thing we can think about is just get the numbers out there. It's just flat not the case that the federal government carries us. It's the opposite. So campaign publicity.
Okay, thank you. You know, this has been a wonderful discussion. This is the year-ending Humanities celebrating 225 years of the district. We have one final comment, and then we will go around with each of our panelists to make their final comments in 30 seconds.
Yes,
Could
Paul.
you stand, please?
Hi, Paul, this is Director Lee. I worked on the Hill in the 80s, and you mentioned that we had a Democratic president, House and Senate in 2008. We didn't make any progress. But we now have a Republican, far-right Republican Congress and far-right Republican president. And the perils and the implications are significant. You said we were caught with our disarmed to some extent. I think that we need to not only direct our attention to the local community, but particularly to the congressional community. When you're sitting on a $13 billion budget here that is totally at the disposal of the Congress in terms of the budget autonomy, we're going to have some issues. I wanted to know, are we thinking not only about statehood, but from a prophylactic point of view about the enfranchisement issues? Because a single vote can go through a Republican Congress and the White House like we haven't seen in some years. And I think it's a very significant and dangerous issue for us.
It is a very significant and dangerous issue for us. You're absolutely right. I don't think that most of the residents of the District of Columbia have processed adequately yet the real threat that we're facing, not just to our home, but to our democratic values. You know, this is an election that, if you had to look to a historical comparison, we might have hoped this was 1932, ushering in a new coalition. But the year that sticks in my mind is 1936, and how are we going to react? And I'm talking about the one that they had in Berlin. And let me be clear, when I talk about 1936, I'm not automatically jumping to 1943 and 1944 and the dark direction that came. But when you're faced with a rising tide of ultra right-wing nationalism, how we react as a community is going to be important. And everybody probably is familiar with the words of Pastor Niemöller, who talked about when they first targeted the trade unionists. He didn't really focus on it because he wasn't a trade unionist, and they went for the communists, and they went for that, and finally the Jews and the Catholics, and when they came for him, nobody was left. We know that we are going to be seeing attacks on vulnerable populations here in the District of Columbia, here in around the country. And it's going to be up to us to make sure that we are metaphorically, if not in practice, cleaning out and making ready those annexes behind the bookcases in all of our communities, so that we are going to stand by, and when they move to attack any vulnerable population, they know that we will stand with them here, whether the attack is directed at us or people that speak a different language, people who have a different religion, or people that don't even look like us.
Okay, thank you. So at this time, give everybody a wonderful round of applause. Come on now, make some noise. Yes. At this time, I'm going to ask each panelist in 30 seconds or less to give us your closing comments. We're starting with Ms. Sabia Prince.
Thank you so much. 30 seconds. Okay. A number of elephants in the room. One is the big orange one that occurred on the 11th of November. I think the other one is gentrification. I mean, demolishing public housing and soaring rents and the soaring evictions and the foreclosures. I think these are going to be issues that we need to grapple with. The good news is that people are organizing, people are developing more radical strategies to maintain their homes. They don't want to be displaced. So I guess if we can tap into some of that energy, we may be able to foresee some changes in that area.
Okay, Ms. Clement.
Okay, so my theme is that it only matters so much what the fools on the hill do. It matters a great deal what we here do. And I will say also that this is about claiming the city, defending the city, and So thank you, Joy Austin, and thank you, everybody at the Humanities Council, because you make it possible for all of us to be out in events like this, claiming the city and being in our city. And equally, thank you to everybody who's coming out, everyone who's here tonight, everyone who goes out, uses the city, loves the city, enjoys the city, relishes the city. That's how we win. And I am sure that urban culture will be victorious.
Thank you, Mr. Musgrove.
You know, a wise person once said, when someone tells you who they are, you should believe them. If you all go online and look at the GOP's 2016 platform, as it regards DC, you should be clear that they not only have no intention of expanding self-determination in the city, they actually intend to roll it back. And so I just want to underscore what Paul was saying and say, you need to join an organization that tries to protect DC self-determination. And you need to be prepared not to be so respectable in the years ahead. We will have to find a way to use whatever we can, our bodies, our voices, to get in the way of legislation that will undermine our democracy.
Okay, Senator Paul Strauss, thank you.
It's easy to be discouraged given the level of our aspirations and the reality that we're suddenly facing politically. But it's also difficult to be in a room decorated by portraits of Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, President Obama, Cesar Chavez, so many great leaders who have faced difficult times in their movements, and not be equally inspired and know that eventually we will be able to prevail. We did take a step forward in our movement. We will be facing some setbacks, but we are emerging with a energized and renewed commitment to our own equality, and I do believe that deep in my heart we shall overcome.
And finally, Mr. Charles Wilson.
So thank you again for the invitation tonight. I really appreciated the discussion. I learned a lot from all the panelists here. Again, I just think we need to put the energy back into the strategy and incorporate into that strategy how we can make self-determination, voting rights, statehood a part of the conversation for every resident in the District of Columbia, so they feel a part of that conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Give it up for our panel tonight. This is Humanitini by the DC Commission on the Humanities. We have certainly enjoyed your participation coming out all year long. For those of you who have been here before when I've moderated, you know I gotta add a little entertainment. We gotta have a little bit of poetry. We gotta end this year and this season with a summary of no taxation without representation. Recapping the beginning of DC history, unveiling its mystery since 1791, where the United States Constitution defined the nation's capital as a federal district separate from everyone, under the direct jurisdiction of Congress, laboring under its watchful eye. No taxation without representation has been our plight as the years and time have gone by. From Mayors Barry to Dixon, Fenty, Bowser, and Gray, the District of Columbia has been rallying for its voice to awaken to a new day, where to the people, for the people, and by the people, our vote should count. Through the November 8th election is what this Humanitini has been all about. Tonight also concludes the 225th year anniversary series by Humanities DC. Discussions that are thought-provoking with meaning, and to all a good night for tonight's Humanitini. Thank you and happy holidays.
I just have a couple of housekeeping measures to cover. First, the important thing is please fill out your audience survey. If you haven't done so already, it's important. And then second, this is coming down from a high plane of discussion, but a couple of basic things to talk about. The first thing is we have a raffle. DC Brown has offered us some goods. We can show Stephanie in the someone is going to take this home, so I want to call out a number. So check, does anyone have a route ticket? Let me do this. Becky, can you take it? Read the last 3 digits.
The last 3 digits are 710.
Everyone who is here tonight, please, as you exit, grab a humanity. Okay, Stephanie's going to hand you a Humanities class. It's a complimentary gift for coming out tonight in our last Humanities series. Thank you again, and look forward to